This was picked up in 1992 by Michael Jensen and Mecklin, I forgot his first name, where they say Hayek was on the right track, but he only highlights one aspect. He doesn't highlight the right assignment problem and the control or agency problems. By saying this, they automatically say that actually economic organization must solve two different kinds of problems. The right assignment problem, determining who should exercise the decision right. How do I know that you have the best person to do a certain task? And the control or agency problem. How do I know that once I delegate to you the task, you're going to follow that task through in the best interest of the corporation or the organization that you're part of? These are the two fundamental problems. How can they be solved? They can be solved in two different ways. They say that you must have the rights to act and the knowledge overlap or match or dovetail or collocate, as they say. This happens in only two ways. You can move the knowledge to those with the decision rights, or you can move the decision rights to those with the knowledge. So this is one step forward vis-a-vis Hayek, who only had dispersion of knowledge. Here we have rights to use as well. However, they also did not fully develop a theory because they don't tell you directly which structure corresponds to which kind of problem that you're solving. So here's a table that we can derive. You have on the horizontal axis on top the rights to knowledge to act and the knowledge to rights to act. And the governance structure is the output. So if you have rights to knowledge to act, you have a market. And I'm going to claim you also have the voluntary modes of production, of which open source is an important example. If you have knowledge to rights to act, you have various forms of internal organization or governance structures which are like the firm, the Department of Defense, Microsoft, the state, strategic alliance, a university, etc. Anything that's hierarchical in a certain sense, just as a first approximation, is a structure that has knowledge to rights to act. How does that work? I think that it's best explained if you think on the opposite box, the one rights to knowledge to act. If I'm in a market, nobody tells me how to shop for tuna. I go around in a market and go to different stores, looking for the brand of tuna that I like, until I find the brand of tuna that I like. So my rights move until I find the knowledge. My rights to act moves to the knowledge to act. I got to find that knowledge out. I have the right to act upon it, though. In a corporation, it's the opposite. You're hired based on your assumed competence, which means your assumed knowledge. So you're hired based on a knowledge that people think you have based on your curriculum vitae, and then you're given the rights to act. If you're a programmer, if you're an accountant, your degree says that. That means you have that knowledge implicitly. And that means if you're hired, the corporation gives you the right to act on that knowledge. So the collocation is opposite. This is important. Now, this is the first approximation argument that I have that is actually the most preliminary of the entire talk. I claim that if we break down even more the Jensen and Mecklin distinction, which is based on Hayek, we can actually introduce Hayek again through the back door by using his distinction between order and organization. So we can say instead of having a one-line matrix, we can have a 2-by-2 matrix distinguishing different organizational forms. So based on the previous slide, I said that in the bazaar, which is the ideal type of voluntary production, you have rights to knowledge to act. So you have voluntary open source production, kind of like Linux. At the same time, you have specific rules of conduct. You're going towards a specific end, producing that particular software program. Even though these specific rules of conduct, may be more general than the ones of the traditional firm, but they're still moving towards a specific direction. An order, instead, is the traditional one where the rules of conduct are general, like the market, the common law, and the language. Then again, on the other column, you have specific rules of conduct in an organization where knowledge migrates to the rights to act. So you have Microsoft, Department of Defense, again, etc. You can have, we heard the other day discussion about the European Union. I think you can have, especially if you adopt a public choice perspective, that you can have a knowledge to rights to act structure where there are general rules of conduct, imposed rules of conduct, in other words, which an example could be a supranational structure like the European Union trying to do a constitutional treaty from top down. But the story goes, okay, we amplified Hayek with Jensen and Mecklin. We're kind of saying that open source software production of the voluntary type is actually an organization. And again, this is an idea that I haven't fully developed, but I think I'm on the right track. But it still doesn't give us what actually open source software is actually doing. Open source software production is actually doing in terms of the ultimate primitives that we have in our theory of economics, which are markets and firms. So in order to understand what's going on, we actually have to go back to Coase, whose article on the firm is a classic and got published in the same issue of Economica where Hayek published his first paper on knowledge, Economics and Knowledge, 1937. Coase says that the market is the exchange of products or outputs. And here's the key. Exchange is coordinated spontaneously. Relative prices direct the resources rather than authority or fiat. In the firm, what does he say? We have contracts for products that are replaced with employment contracts. So what you're doing in a firm is substituting a factor market for a product market. Chung, when he was at Chicago, was actually the guy who developed a full-blown theory of this based on Coasean ideas. So what happens, the other characteristic is also, as you all know better than me, a firm replaces spontaneous coordination with planned coordination. You see, we have other categories of distinction now. But this distinction, again, leaves out of the picture two other alternatives which are not examined. Product markets governed by central direction and factor markets coordinated spontaneously. The example of the first one, product markets governed by central direction, is outsourcing, for example. You outsource what you need because you can't do it in-house. Voluntary production is actually an example of a factor market coordinated spontaneously. Factor market, okay? Not goods market. People, labor, production. In other words, and here's the essence of what voluntary production is, of which open source is a subset, is an organizational form that permits the exchange of effort rather than the exchange of products, and it does so under a regime or a structure in which suppliers of effort self-identify. Remember, there is self-selection in what you're doing. Nobody tells you what to do. In which suppliers of effort self-identify like suppliers of products in a market, rather than accepting assignments like employees in a firm. Okay? And here we have Coase's generalization, which is also based on the previous distinctions. So, if you have individuals contributing products, so we are in the top row, and you have individuals that do not self-identify with a contribution, I tell you what to do, but you're contributing a product, you can have inside contracting, outsourcing, and virtual firms like Dell or internet firms. If you have a contribution of products and people self-identify, you have a market, right? On the other hand, if individuals are contributing effort, their work, their input, and they do not self-identify, I tell you what to do, then you have the firm. If individuals contribute effort, but they self-identify with what they're doing, I select the task I want to work on, then I'm in the case of voluntary production. If you like, we can take the scientific example. Nobody told me to work on open source. I selected open source. I selected my effort, so there was spontaneity in the selection of my contribution towards research. That's the key. The spontaneity is not the order itself. The spontaneity is what you're contributing. You're self-selecting what you're contributing. This is the distinction. Now, we identified the essence of open source production. It is time to quickly look at how actually the internal organization of open source production takes place. And we can go back to another classical liberal, a great classical liberal who studied all, or almost all, because it was also based on, the previous thinkers. And we can go back to Adam Smith's theory of division of labor to understand what's going on in voluntary production. Now, Adam Smith indirectly put forth two theories of division of labor, which were picked up by people like Rosenberg, Ames and Rosenberg, Leon Hufvud, Stigler himself, and others. This is a case, and I thought I would never say this, where actually Occam's razor apply. We don't need to get sophisticated because we have a template from Leonhofer, which is very easy to get the point across.